The application, the entire interface has been trained to notice and detect cells that were abnormal. And we train them on specific cancers: breast cancer, lymphoma, prostate cancer. And what we were able to achieve and show, and we've published on this, so this is the thing, the detection rate for that machine, that platform, was more sensitive, more specific than specialists that have been practicing for years to detect that kind of cancer. So just think about the implications. You have an opportunity to see more cases much more efficiently, much more accurately, and you can actually use this tool to help you do your job better. And that's just one example.
The Black Futurist.
That's one small step for man.
Okay.
The reason that I really enjoy going to tech conferences are multiple, but they boil down to two things: what I can learn and who I can meet. It's tech and people. And it really, all that boils down to people, because most of the time the tech is just about people anyway. This CES 2024 was no different. Again, I was blessed to be able to go in early as a tech host, learning as much as possible, and then creating storylines that connect year to year, the iterations that we see in technologies, and then letting people know who sometimes were on their first show, what we're seeing, why we're seeing it, and how to connect the dots, and maybe interpolate what we might see next year. But on top of what we saw tech-wise, I got to meet some incredible people. And today's guest is no different. I have with me Dr. Hassan Tetteh. And incredibly, we have so much in common and didn't know, but he had the wisdom to see it, point it out, and hang out so that we could talk afterwards. So thank you so much for doing that and introducing yourself outside of the group context so that we could talk and have this moment. Dr. Tetteh, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. We were on a tour that was titled The Implications of AI.
Correct.
At CES. Yeah. And just that title alone really guided my approach. It guided my approach to make it very academic, to say I'm going to have some very smart people on this show floor with me. And if we're talking about the implications of AI, it means that we're going to be hypothesizing. Like, we don't know. We'll find out. But maybe if we work together, we can come up with a working theory. And at the end of the show, you handed me a book. And I didn't realize until I got all the way back home, after I got on my flight, got all the way back, that you'd also inscribed it, which was really awesome. I really appreciate that. This is one of the books in your The Art of Human Care series. This one in particular is with AI, artificial intelligence. Can you tell us, Dr. Tetteh, number one, what is the Art of Human Care series and why did you write it?
Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, so by way of introduction, I'm a child of some immigrant parents from Africa. So that sets the stage right there. Mm-hmm. I was made in the USA, as my dad liked to say, and I was born in Brooklyn, New York. So we start with that, right? And that's important because it's the answer to your question in many ways.
Yeah.
So growing up in the 80s and the 90s in New York, I, like many of my colleagues back then, we expressed ourselves through art. And our art form back then was music, rhyming, rapping, and it was also graffiti.
That's right.
I was a graffiti artist, and I was all into it. I had my tagline. Starsky was one of my tag names. Of course, a lot of people had that, but you would tell individuals by the way that their art was manifest, right? The way that their art was displayed. So that's how you knew which one was which and who was who. I was a child of that. I grew up in that era, and my friends and I had our art book all the time. We always had our markers. We were out there tagging, and we were expressing ourselves. That's important because it answers your question in this way. When I was getting ready to go to high school, I got accepted to art and design high school. And that's actually a big deal back then. It still is now, because you had to send a portfolio and show your work. And you had to actually do some drawing in this right at the time of the interview. And I did all that. I got accepted and I was ready to go. Now, here I am. I got accepted to art and design high school, ready to go to high school. And I'm just like, I'm over the moon because I'm going to go to Manhattan. I lived in Brooklyn. I was going to take the train. It was a big deal. Yep. I go to my West African immigrant father and I tell him I'm going to art school. And you're laughing already. You're laughing because you know where this is going, right? yeah, you're not going to any art school. He shut it down right away. He's like, no, no, you're going to go become a doctor like you said you were going to do and like your mom and I've been telling you to do. So I went to Brooklyn Technical High School, which is a science and engineering school, and the rest is history. I became a doctor. But I have always been an artist to heart. And
Yes.
so when I came into my maturity as a physician, as a surgeon, as a heart and lung transplant surgeon, I have always carried this creative spirit within me, this artist within me. And after I wrote my first book and I was looking to write my next book, I said, let me create something that's really important, really personal. And let me
Yeah.
combine that with all I've learned about taking care of patients. Let me create something called the Art of Human Care. Let me manifest that in a book and in a book series. And so that was the genesis of the Art of Human Care. And now I've written a few books in the series. I should also tell you, much like yourself, I was a futurist. So this book right here, you can see
Star
it,
Patrol.
Star Patrol, right? It was written by this guy right here.
It's a young Dr. Tetteh.
That's a 12-year-old Dr. Tetteh. So in 1985, I wrote this book. It's called Star Patrol, and it begins. The year was 2020. A lone hero and crime fighter protects the never-ending right to justice. In 1985, I wrote about 2020 like it was just like this far-off, distant time, which already passed.
Yeah.
So my point is, I've always been a futurist. I've been an artist, and being a doctor has not detracted from any of those central tenets. And I'm passionate about taking care of patients. The Art of Human Care embodies everything that I've learned about my career taking care of patients, and it infuses and brings in the creative and healing power of art. And that's the series. That's the way to answer your question. It has to be that way.
That's fantastic. On that note, I'm going to read your bio because I think it's important to give context to what you just said about art and that fork in the road between how you saw your education going versus how your father saw your education going and how far you went in his direction. Dr. Hassan Tetteh is a U.S. Navy captain and associate professor of surgery at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences and adjunct faculty at Howard University College of Medicine. He was selected a 2019 Emerging Leader in Health and Medicine Scholar by the National Academy of Medicine. Currently, Tetteh is a thoracic surgeon for MedStar Health at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. He leads a specialized thoracic adapted recovery STAR team in Washington, D.C., and his research in thoracic transplantation aims to expand heart and lung recovery and save lives. A native of Brooklyn, New York. And now we go into that list of how far you went in education alone, not even experience. It's just education, brother. Tetteh received his BS from State University of New York at Plattsburgh, his MD from SUNY Downstate Medical Center, his MPA from Harvard Kennedy School of Government, an MBA from Johns Hopkins University Carey Business School, and an MS in National Security Strategy with a concentration in artificial intelligence from the National War College. There's even more, but that kind of brings us to the doorstep to say how we even got to this discussion was regarding this AI conference. And now we know that not only are you a doctor who definitely values education, and I'm sure has made his immigrant parents proud, but you also are leaning back in to your own younger version of yourself that wanted to be an artist. And there was an episode of this show earlier where we talked about what engineering was. A buddy of mine went on a dictionary or whatever, and he said, what is engineering? And in the definition was the word artful. So It was either a scientific or artful solution to a problem. And so I love the fact that you found that same common space between the science and the art to say, I've incorporated that in my entire career. And that brings us up to today to say, and how do you see AI as a next step? And can it incorporate both the science and the art for artful solutions to some of the problems that you're seeing?
Yeah, the short answer to that is absolutely it does. Those of us that have been following AI and thinking about AI and knowing about AI have appreciated that from its very beginning. When you look at the way that one defines AI, and I'm sure you have had this question either asked of you or you've had to answer the question because you certainly have had this experience. Many people are going to define AI in different ways. And, in its basic core, I like to think about AI as a manifestation of a human-like characteristic produced by a machine or something artificial, right? Not human. So again, there was a time when people thought washing machines were AI because it was like a robot, right? It
Right.
was doing something that we used to do by hand. Street sweeping, all of these things potentially could be interpreted as AI. In fact, they are, right? Because you saw at CES the robots, right? Now, robots, of course, they are the quintessential AI sort of depiction. It's yes, this thing looks like a robot.
Right.
It walks like a robot, it's moving like a robot, but it's not human, but it's trying to do human things. It's making coffee, as you saw,
Right.
it's sweeping the floors, it's cleaning, it's
Right.
actually being like a companion, and it's interacting with people, answering its questions, asking questions, and then responding to them. So my point is, when you talk about this space between creativity, between art and the expression, and then incorporating technology, yes, I think that's the juxtaposition of where we are with AI. Now, it happens to be that we are in a different and a defining moment in time when it comes to AI for a number of reasons. I like to think of them as like super forces, right? There's a number of super forces. There's computing power that we
Mm.
had unlike any time before. I talked about my futuristic self. So that same 12-year-old that you saw in that book cover, my first book, talking about the future that was so far away in 2020, I used to sit down with my Commodore 64 for those of us that are relics and think about that. And I spent hours coding on that thing so I could play a game that lasted for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Think about what we have right now in our pockets, this supercomputer. I don't know. There's not enough space in my office here and perhaps in the whole building to hold all the Commodore 64s it would take to actually equal what we can now carry in our pockets.
That's right.
So that's an amazing super force. The other super force we have is data, and we have this digital record of almost everything, right? Because that has been what we've been doing and producing and curating and collecting over all this time. And AI models are trained on data. That is also the other super force. And then a couple other super forces are this investment. Everyone's investing in AI.
Right.
With the advent of ChatGPT that brought AI in this tangible way to everybody. Now they could see it, they could feel it, they could touch it, they could play with it. It's made it sort of like front and center everyone's mind. But those of us that have been working in this area, in this space for years, know that decades ago, people were talking about AI and no one's paying as much attention as they are right now. Those investments though are turning out incredible things, right? Because they're creating models where you don't have to be someone that knows how to code to actually use and work with AI. That's, I think, the beauty of what ChatGPT brings us in large
Yeah.
language models. And then of course you have what I call the greatest super force of all. And I think the greatest super force of all is people. We have talented people that have gone above and beyond what our forefathers did decades ago in this space. They've
Right.
leveraged these tools, they've leveraged the technology, they've leveraged the supercomputing power that we have, they've leveraged the data. And of course, they've leveraged human creativity into ingenuity and intuitiveness and artful expression, to coin your engineer's friend's phrase,
Yeah.
to bring us what we have right now. And I mean, one need only walk around a little bit in CES's corridors to see, like, wow, what is not only here right now, but just imagine what is coming, right?
Yep.
And that's why this time right now, this really pivotal time in our human existence, particularly in the relationship with machines and data and this artificial intelligence force, is unlike any other time in the past. And I think it's setting us up for, incredible things to come in the future.
That's fantastic. I don't think that we have to talk at a novice level for this audience. So I want to go a little deeper. I know that you are well read, well informed, and educated about AI. When we were on our tour, there's a couple things that came up that I want to get your one-on-one feedback on. One, we talked about the difference between generative AI and things like you were talking about ChatGPT versus deterministic AI. And from a medical perspective, I would think that most of the work that we're talking about is in the deterministic side for you, which is, given I've trained this model to recognize a certain set of data, it now can shorten the time that I can get a recommendation about something that it's observing. Can you share with us any applications that you're already seeing some trust, some confidence in what you're getting back?
Yeah, so I'll give you an answer to that, but let me first give you some context to the answer.
Yep.
How did the book AI come about, right? The Art of Human Care, I talked about that background, but AI specifically, For me, it has been a bit of a journey. It's been a journey of going from thoracic surgery, which is what I'm continuing to do. That's been my clinical discipline, heart and lung transplant surgery specifically, but then recognizing as medicine and healthcare was evolving that there was a new clinical specialty that was being developed, that is being developed, that's maturing right now, and it's called clinical informatics. What is that? It's the marrying of leadership, administration, clinical work, and technology together.
Okay.
Basically, let's use data to help physicians do their jobs better. So there's a clinical informatics subspecialty that I became board certified in a few years ago. That led to many opportunities. And I should mention, you mentioned I was in the military up until just a few months ago, and I retired last August after 25 years of service.
Congratulations.
Now, my last assignment is really what brings us to this question, right, of what I see in AI and this juxtaposition of healthcare. So after I got board certified in clinical informatics, I was fortunate enough to be recruited to serve as the United States Navy's Chief Medical Informatics Officer. What does that mean? That means a lot of things, but in a nutshell, we had oversight on how we use data in the military, specifically in the Navy, to help physicians do their jobs better, better decision making. How do we use the tools of technology, electronics, databases, et cetera, to make healthcare better for those of us that we're serving?
Right.
Now, I also went to the War College. You mentioned that. When I went to the National War College, for those of us that are in the military, it's a great honor as a senior officer to go to the War College. In my case, it was an even greater honor because I got to go to the National War College, which is in my opinion, and many of our alumni feel this way, like the Harvard of war colleges.
Right.
It's the Harvard of war colleges because we have an opportunity to be joint. It's not the Naval War College, not the Army War College, it's the National War College. So we are in class with all of our senior officer colleagues from the different services and the government. It's the alma mater of the late, great General Colin Powell, who, by the way, was the one that encouraged me to go to the National War Colleges instead of going to another school when I had that opportunity. Now, while I was there, I was the only physician in my class of 200 senior service officers that were at the National War College learning about national security strategy. I graduated in 2018. So during those years that I was there, think about what we think about when it comes to national security: cyber intelligence, gathering data, finding and prosecuting and moving forward on missions to serve, protect, and defend the United States and our interests. Now, using data and AI has been something that the intelligence community has been doing since its inception. It's just getting better. The tools are getting better. Now, as a doctor, my vision of this and my clinical informatics background was like, oh my gosh, we are talking about deterministic. We could use information, train models, and now help us with making better decisions. And no better place to do that than in healthcare, when lives are at stake, when sickness and illness can be mitigated. And so I had the opportunity to do a thesis while I was at the War College, and it was called AI and Military Medicine: the Strategic Application of the Technology of Our Era. That was the paper that actually got the attention of a good number of folks that recruited me to lead the Warfighter Health Mission at the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center when the Department of Defense established the organization at the time to lead initiatives to leverage AI across the Department of Defense. And so that was where I was at. Now, while leading that Warfighter Health Mission, I got to see, I was exposed to, I got to meet people that were on the cutting edge of AI, both deterministic and, believe it or not, at the time, generative.
Interesting.
The Microsoft team came to visit us in 2019. And at the time, they showed us a demonstration, which was the beginnings and the rudiments of what we now call ChatGPT. The demonstration was amazing. And at the time, it was very abstract. But now, of course, it makes perfect sense. So we got to see that. But on the deterministic side, we did things which in my humble opinion, were amazing for the time. This is in 2019 and before the pandemic. we helped to create and implement tools that physicians were using at the point of care. One of them in particular was a microscope that we developed in collaboration with Google, another company called Generative, and using the data from the military, specifically images from pathology slides, to train models in an interface that was created and placed into this microscope, which you've probably seen because the
With the
videos
beam
about
splitter.
it. Exactly. And it uses a computer vision to detect, when you're looking through the microscope in that interface, abnormalities. They get drawn around different cells.
Right.
Now think about that. That sounds almost like magic, right? Those cells that are getting identified, they've been trained, the system, the application, the entire interface has been trained to notice and detect cells that were abnormal. And we train them on specific cancers: breast cancer, lymphoma, prostate cancer. And what we were able to achieve and show, and we published on this, so we have a nice publication that's out there, is that this is the thing: the detection rate for that machine, that platform, was more sensitive, more specific than specialists that have been practicing for years to detect that kind of cancer. So just think about the implications. Now, I know people get very bent out of shape and they're like, oh my gosh, you're going to try and replace a doctor. No, we're actually augmenting the ability for the doctor to do their job better. Just think about that. You have an opportunity to see more cases much more efficiently, much more accurately. And you can actually use this tool to help you do your job better. And that's just one example. We had similar examples in radiology, plain films. We developed a system and a platform where we were actually, at the height of the pandemic, able to use chest x-rays to detect certain abnormalities that were indicative and highly likely in probability of that patient with certain characteristics on an x-ray having COVID. Now, it was at a time when the testing wasn't as robust, so that was an important development at that time. So those are just a couple of the deterministic things. And then let me just zoom out, because that's microscopic. That's sort of like right in your face. Yep. I'll zoom out, and something else that we were very proud of, we published on this as well. This was another big collaboration with our folks from Amazon, IBM, a company called Humetrics, who you probably would appreciate. It was the CEO who I was moderating the panel with at CES during our global health session. But at the time of the pandemic, this is early 2020, when testing was very poor. Reporting was even pretty inaccurate. It wasn't as robust as it had become later into the process. We were able to partner with HHS and CMS and obtain claims data. Why is that important? Because we were sitting down thinking about, how do you solve a problem? Think about what you said right at the beginning of this: being creative, thinking about how do we use information and data? How do we gather all of this to solve a problem? The problem at that time was we did not know how the disease COVID was spreading throughout the country, right? There were pockets. In fact, I remember this vividly because I'm from New York. I have family and friends in New York. We lost family members to COVID. Now, in New York, early 2020, when the COVID pandemic was hitting that area hard, there were other parts of the country that had no cases of COVID. So they almost were living in a different world.
Population density as a variable.
We didn't know that, but the testing wasn't very good. So we thought to ourselves, let's think about this. People are going to the hospitals and they're presenting themselves with symptoms. Those symptoms are getting coded, they're getting reported to CMS so that they can get claims coming back so the hospitals can get reimbursed for those visits. What are people coming to the hospitals with a lot of complaints? Flu-like symptoms. There wasn't a code at the time for COVID, but back then we said, what if we had the ability to extrapolate those flu-like symptoms as presentations to these hospitals that CMS is collecting millions and millions of records on, and let's use that as the basis for building a model to say that those are most likely, particularly in certain age demographics, the Medicare population in particular, which is above 65, the highest risk for COVID at the time. Let's use that data. Let's build models so that we can have advanced analytics and determine at the zip code level in a predictive way where COVID was spreading. Why is that important? You might be like, who cares? Very important, right? Because back then people were thinking about, where do we deploy resources? Do we send a bunch of doctors and nurses and protective equipment and masks to an area where COVID is not really manifesting, where there are no cases, probably not the greatest utilization of resources. But let's send them someplace where there is a high density of cases. And oh, by the way, let's send them someplace where, based on our models of projections and our accuracy of predicting where cases are going to spike in days to come, let's preemptively send those resources there. And that's exactly what we did. And we were helping to inform strategy of taking care of patients during this very critical time. So that was like, I'm just zooming out, that's a population. And we trained those models on millions of records.
Yep.
And it took the collaboration, took the creativity, and the cooperation of a great number of people to be able to do that. But that was also some of the work that we did. Again, another great deterministic example, but at a macro level, and thinking about the micro level and almost everything in between. I mean, there were many, many projects and initiatives that we were able to put into place to implement and to scale, and in an incredible way. And now that I'm out of the military, my current work, and you saw I was representing my current company, Human Care Technologies, which you can imagine where that name came from, is this amalgamation of all my experience of what I had in the military, taking all of that experience, knowledge, the lessons learned, the hard lessons learned, and applying it now in the civilian sector, helping out organizations that are looking for solutions to help them do their jobs better. That was what I've been working on. That is a good answer to your question, but that is also sort of the manifestation of these many years of experience and kind of being at the right place at the right time coming together.
That's fantastic. Do you remember when we were on our walk on the show floor and I was talking about geography and the importance of zip code in America?
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah, you said it actually, that's well known, especially for those of us that have lived in different zip codes,
Yep.
how different one's health is, how different one's lifestyle is.
Yep.
But more importantly, to your point, which is what you said, how different one's education and their longevity is.
Yep.
Think about that. Living in a different zip code has a deterministic effect on your life, like
Right.
almost every aspect of your life. It's just incredible.
So on that note, we were seeing several companies that were technology companies from Korea. And there was one in particular that, because of Korea's public healthcare system, was able to train their AI models and create digital therapeutics for depression and other ailments. And one of the things that we were talking about is the challenges we would have doing that in a public setting in America. But I wonder if, because your time in the military, I would think that the data you get from observing soldiers and their medical records would allow the military to have some incredible data sets to train their AI. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And you're absolutely right. That's one of the great benefits that I fully appreciated, certainly in my time in the military while at the Jake, but more so as I looked at what other folks were doing. What I mean by that is, in parallel to the work we were doing in the military, when I look at what other folks were doing when they were developing different algorithms and different models themselves, their training data set, not necessarily because it was intentional, but just because that was what they had available to them, were sometimes not as diverse as they needed to be to get the best outcomes. And this kind of speaks to your point. In the military, however, the military, by custom, by tradition, and actually by law, has to reflect society. So we have a composition that's very reflective across the military that really reflects the American society. And why is that important? Because in the military, you are getting your healthcare mostly and largely in the military. So you're sort of in this military bubble. Right. And you're coming in when you're young, and if someone like me that stays in for a couple of decades, and then you get out and then you go into the VA system, which is connected in some way, but not entirely yet. But then you have a continuation of your medical record. So you have basically a composite picture of a very diverse population spread over across a period of time with digital data. That's really important. So when it comes to training things and training models, and when it comes to trying to pattern recognize and look for different variables, it's good to do that when you have a very diverse data set. So you don't have something that's going to give you a bias when you don't have enough diversity in that data. So the military, I think, has that advantage. Yeah. And we leveraged it. We absolutely leveraged it. I think that's why when you looked at what we did with the microscope, right?
Mhm.
That data was coming from collecting hundreds of thousands of slides. That data set that we trained those particular models on, the amount of slides that we had, that means individual cases of pathology were well over 400,000
Yeah.
cases of different people that largely made up the military. They're military servicemen and women, but also their family members, because they too get their care in the military system. So it's a really rich data set and it's reflective of society, but it gives us an advantage, or gives anyone that has an advantage when you're looking at a diverse data set to give you the best kind of solution when it comes to whatever models you're developing and whatever problem you're trying to solve.
Number one, it's an incredible asset to have. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's someone having a conversation about using that data to create a new revenue stream for private medical companies who are training their AI. Say, look, you guys can have access to our data to train your AI for more reliable results.
Yeah, we certainly had those types of discussions. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that experience really engendered in me a great passion for making sure that if I can in any way impact and influence, how systems are implementing and utilizing AI in the future, I want to bring that experience to bear.
Right.
And one of the fundamental ways I think I could do that is through education, right? And sharing my experience. So I'm working currently on a new book with Forbes book. In fact, we just met with our team yesterday, and
Awesome.
the book's title is Smarter Healthcare with AI.
That's fantastic.
Smarter Healthcare with AI. Let's let that sear in there.
Yep.
And then leveraging the military applications to make AI possible for the civilian sector. So it's basically taking what I've learned over those years and codifying some of those processes, but
Mm-hmm.
also sharing the stories of success and also the challenges that we overcome and overcame to really show and highlight what we were able to do, making impossible things possible. And I would also be remiss if I didn't mention to this audience that this is very important. The military, for all that it does, many people don't recognize or realize or give the military credit for some of the greatest advances in healthcare that came as a direct result of the military. For
Yep.
example, it was Washington's Continental Army, go back all the way back to the
Mm-hmm.
Revolution time. We always knew this inherently. Anyone that has been in the military and served as a healthcare provider, whether you were a medic right on the front line or you're a surgeon back in the tent taking care of patients, or you're a population health person, you know that no matter what campaign it is, you can go back all the way to the Peloponnesian War to current campaigns right now. Illness and sickness kill more people than bullets when it comes to war campaigns. And that was not any different during the Revolutionary War. So think about
I'm
this,
sure.
Brandon. Washington, when he was a much younger Washington, when he wasn't the general of the Continental Army, was impacted by smallpox in a very serious way, lost friends and family, had it himself. And so he recognized the scourge of smallpox. Now, the British soldiers were also suffering for that, but so were the Continental Army. He actually implemented a policy that had a direct impact on our success. And what he did was he exposed people through a process at the time called aerosolization, which is giving exposure through a very small innocuous introduction of the smallpox disease into people so they can develop immunization to
Right.
it. And it was think about it as an early vaccine.
Right.
So this whole concept of vaccinations, that came from the military. Like
Yeah.
we in the military, we get vaccinations all the time when we're
Right.
going to different areas of the world, because we know that that is a great risk to us. That's a great risk for us having success in the mission, because before a bullet would even come our way or harm us, we could get sick, we can get ill, we can get an
Mm-hmm.
infection, we can contract a virus or bacteria that can be devastating. That's just one example. Fast forward the Civil War, one of the very first blood transfusions done by the military after one individual had to get an amputation. The
Right.
entire blood banking process was developed by the Army. Take it for granted now. You go into a hospital, God forbid you're in a trauma, you have a cancer or something that debilitates you and you need a transfusion. That ability to be able to transfuse that blood, the rudiments of that, the very beginning of it, the genesis of that came from the military's technology, the advancements of like, how do you preserve blood? How do you bank blood? All through the Army. And that's why I believe the work that we've done and are continuing to do through the electronic health record, through our robust data set that you mentioned, And now with the application of AI, I think is going to be one of the vanguards for how that permeates itself into sort of the zeitgeist of the civilian sector. And people are going to be able to learn and advance what they're doing through the solutions that the military has already pioneered. I saw it firsthand, and I felt like I had this front row seat to this new transition, this new moment in time where the military is yet again doing something that is going to propel the civilian sector years, if not decades ahead, if it was just left to its own.
Right. I have a few notes here, questions I want to bounce off you. They're not all connected, but they're connected to parts of the conversation that we've already had. Okay.
Sure.
A punch list. Let's start with the beginning. Where are your parents from?
Both my parents, unfortunately, have passed away. My dad actually passed away when I graduated from med school, and he was from Ghana, West Africa, specifically Accra. My mom was from Sierra Leone, West Africa, Freetown, Sierra Leone. She passed away, believe it or not, just last year, just a few days after I retired from the Navy. After 25 years, she retired. She passed away 5 days after my retirement. I'd like to think that she wanted to make sure I closed that chapter.
I'm sorry to hear that, and also happy to hear that she was able to see yet another one of your life achievements, which is incredible. Unconnected to that, but another question it's a question I'm sure you've got an answer for. It is, as we're talking about training AI models, especially in your field where it comes to life and death, it's no longer a large language model where we're just talking about maybe marketing text or a graphics model where we're talking about the better picture versus some weird picture with too many hands, which we often see on like Mid-Journey and stuff. There's got to be a point where we know that we've got a data set, we're putting inputs, and in our outputs, we have low confidence. And as we start to get better models and better training, we kind of get into this maybe a gray area where we're getting increased confidence. At some point, we got to come out of that gray area and say we have high confidence in our output. When you're dealing with life and death, what are some of the ways that you guys are benchmarking when we come out of that gray area, when we can say, yes, this is a high confidence model? What do those benchmarks look like?
That's a great question. This specific question actually came up during CES in the panel we were moderating in the context of, how do you come to the point where you're going to accept a model, basically an output, right? That says this has an impact on, or will have an impact on the way you deliver care, whether it's just a diagnosis or a probability that someone has this problem, or you should address this problem in a certain way. That's a very good question. So I'll answer it a couple ways. One, fundamentally is testing and evaluation, because I think that at the end of the day is really how you get better models. Testing and evaluation was one of the core, greatest, highest return on investment activity that we had when we were at the Jake, when I was at the Jake doing our work, because we wanted to make sure that we were testing and evaluating those outputs to give us, like you said, that confidence. When you get 100%, almost never will you get that area under the curve where you're going to get 100%, right? We all know that, right? Even in that example that I cited with the models that we developed for pathology, our area under the curve never got to 100%. It was like an asymptote. We got very close, meaning that we were getting really, really close statistically to saying that this definitively as a probabilistic answer and result is very good.
Yeah.
That sort of output was way better, like I said, statistically better than what the humans were getting.
Yep.
So fundamentally, testing and evaluation, that's number one. Number two, there is going to be, and there are already right now, standards in place. And I think people are working really hard in our respective agencies to sort of validate these models before they get applied and put into use.
Yeah.
And the greatest example of this is the FDA. I mean, the FDA are right now, they're in the middle of approving artificial intelligence solutions that are going to be used in healthcare. They're doing it right now, just like they do for drugs. That's why we know that drugs go through a certain process before they become available and utilized and prescribed to the public. In the same way, I think the FDA is working on that. They're doing that. So we have these agencies in place that are working on that. We're also working on standards, because there's also that. How do you standardize something? How do you make sure everyone is speaking the same language? So institutions like the National Institute of Standards, NIST, those folks are working. We used to work in tandem with them when we were at the Jake, thinking about what do we need to do in the future? What do we need to put in place in terms of standards? to ensure that when we develop some of these models, they're going to be not only accurate, they're going to be something that can be translatable across different disciplines. And what are going to be the standards that we're going to adopt universally so that we can make sure that we're all speaking the same language when we're talking about this is a solution or an application that can be applied in this problem set. So I think all of those things are going to happen. But this is my one caveat to all of this. In healthcare, like almost any other science for that matter, nothing is ever 100%. So one of the things that the early adopters and maybe sort of the laggards in healthcare are going to have to come to grips with, it's no different if you think about this tool, this AI being a tool, as in any other tool that we use in our sort of wheelhouse. There's going to have to be a compromise, or there's going to have to be this place in that gray areas where you're talking about, where you're never going to get something that's 100%. There is no 100% in life. That's just not, it doesn't happen. There's some certainty in life. Most of us are going to die. That is a certainty for sure. It's a biologic certainty. But when it comes to a lot of these other things, it's not really a certainty. When we deliver a diagnosis to a patient, we are taking a constellation of a number of different studies, the history, the background, the physical exam, the imaging that we did to say, this is most likely what you have.
Yep.
And then we have to sometimes cut the tissue out or take the tumor out. And then we put it under a microscope and we look at it and we say, it's most likely this. So it's still never really 100% with anything that we do in healthcare. We are using, like anyone else that makes a lot of decisions based on a lot of information to synthesize a conclusion with the highest statistical probability that this is most likely what it is. So this tension is going to come to the forefront more and more, because there are going to be times, in my opinion, where AI is going to continue to outperform humans. It's just going to happen, right? Just because what is the data that these algorithms, these models are working on? It's infinitely more vast than what we can digest as humans. So over time, they're just going to get better. And there's going to have to be a point where we have to accept that there could be a time when some of these solutions they're better than humans. But we have to always keep in mind that any of these applications are simply tools. Again, I go back to this with many of my engineering friends that we worked with in the Jake and in the work that we're doing right now, and say that in healthcare, the stakes are high. You're right. It's life and death. It's harm, no harm. It's all of these things. And all of these technologies that we're using, AI in particular, should always be looked at as a tool. The physician, fundamentally, that's responsible for the patient, ideally should be thinking about, how do I use this tool to do my work better, make better decisions, make more informed decisions, give patients perhaps more options or a better pathway to health. But at the same time, I need to be judicious that I don't want to just disregard what's happening as gospel, because it may not always be that way. Like I said, nothing is 100%. So I think that's really what's going to happen. I think over time and in the coming years, there's going to be a lot more critical discussion and debate over this very important topic. When is it that we can use something? There are drugs that are being used off-label. What we mean by that is that it's not used for its intended reason, but it does have some efficacy for other things. And sometimes the patients and the care provider team has to sort of accept that as a compromise. So I think that's what's going to happen naturally, organically, because again, we're not going to ever get to 100%. We're going to get to that gray area always. And unfortunately, we have these institutions in place, FDA, NIST, others, etc., institutional review boards at respective hospitals. That oversee and have oversight over all of these applications. They're going to get involved. It is absolutely going to be a topic of high interest and debate over the coming years, no question.
I like it the way you phrase it. Use it as a tool. And if it does anything for us, like one of the things that I've come to just believe about AI is that in many cases, we're not solving new problems, but these things can be catalysts that can save us time. So we can get to treatment faster, or we can get to the next phase of discussion faster. So if it can save us time and still have some human oversight to say, I'm going to confirm what I think this thing is telling me, I'm super happy about the applications of AI in medicine. And I agree with a lot of what you said. Thank you so much for just bringing informed opinion to the show. Last couple things. Number one, I know you have an event coming up You briefly touched on it. What is that event? What's going on? What do I need to know about it?
Oh, I know. You're talking about the event in March. Yeah. So on March 21st, we have an event coming up. It's called the Art of Human Care Live. It's going to be in Los Angeles, MG Studio, Los Angeles. We'll definitely be putting out some information on that, and we'll make sure that we get that info to your great audience. It is going to be the manifestation of the principles that are espoused in the book of how you prosecute and how you deliver great human care, which doesn't have to always be in healthcare. It's just how do you interact and how do you take care of others.
Yep.
And those principles of purpose, personalization, and partnership. Those are the three principles that underpin everything within the art of human care. We're going to bring together dynamic speakers, perhaps yourself, hopefully, and talk about how they are manifesting these principles of purpose, personalization, and partnership in their respective work. What you're doing right now, as a matter of fact, is absolutely the illustration of this, right? Purpose. Yep. You're talking about what's going on in the future. Are we inventing tomorrow? That's your purpose. That's why we're having these discussions, so people can see what the possibilities are, so they could get creative, they could get excited, they could get motivated about what's coming. And we're personalizing it. You personalize everything to your audience because you know that there's a certain demographic that needs to have this information, because sometimes we're just left out of the discussion. It's not fair, it's not right. But we are doing something great here. You are doing something great here by personalizing this message to those individuals, those folks. And nothing great, in my opinion, happens without partnerships, collaboration. You know, the cited African proverb, you can go fast by yourself, but if you want to go far, you better go with others.
That's right.
And that's it. And that's what we're doing here. We're going far, man. We're going far into the future because of the great work that you're doing, the collaboration that you've built with your guests and with everyone that makes this possible.
I love it, and I would absolutely love to be a part of your event. Now, these last two questions, you can answer or not answer. They have nothing to do with your profession, have nothing to do with AI. But I know a few things about you just based on your background. Number one, you and I grew up listening to the same radio stations in the same city, and our influences were very similar. So I'm going to hit you with the easy one, the easy, hard one. Okay. Your top 5 MCs of all time.
Top 5 MCs of all time. Number 1's got to be Jay-Z for me. That's just, I don't know, it's just me. Number 2 is Rakim, KRS-One, Big Daddy Kane, and I put Tupac in there for sure.
That's a surprise. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Fair list. I have no opinion on it. I just wanted to hear your list and how long it would take you to get to it. So it's there. Next question, and this is the wild pitch. In your opinion, given you had a Commodore 64, you now have more computing power in your pocket than existed in NASA in 1969. Do you believe that humans landed on the moon in 1969?
I believe that, yeah.
There you go. That's it. Hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today, Dr. Tetteh. You are a welcome guest. Consider it an open door and an open invite. I'd love to have you back, whatever you want to talk about, and I'd love for this to be the beginning of your relationship with our audience.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to come back. This is great. And I hope that you are going to come bless us with your presence in March in LA when we bring Human Care Live to the masses. So
I would love to. We'll talk about it offline. Hey, thank you so much.
All right. Take care. This is Hassan Tetteh, hailing from Brooklyn. You are now listening to the Black Futurist Podcast.